You good, Brian? Great. All right. I think we will try and get started here. So we have two meetings here happening tonight. I think most of you are here for the second one. I will call to order the special council meeting of June 27th, 2023 here at the City of Summerside. Call to order being 5:02 p.m. I'll first take a motion to approve the special council meeting agenda. Councillor Adams, second Councillor Snow, all in favor of the agenda. Any opposed? Hearing none, we will move on. Land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land upon which we gather is the unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Abba is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay our respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this land for the past 12,000 years, past, present, and future. Land acknowledgement is a small but meaningful way of showing respect and honoring indigenous peoples of the land on which we live. It is also a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and an important step on the pathway towards reconciliation. Now, there is two quick housekeeping items. One, there's more seating in the media room out there where there's a television. And two, you can buy your 50-50 tickets at the... We certainly have missed an opportunity here tonight, though there are no 50-50 tickets. Call for any councillor to identify a conflict of interest with regards to the special council meeting. Hearing none, we'll then move on to Resolution COS 23092, a bid for FCM Board of Directors meeting. And Councillor Morrison, are you bringing this forward, or am I going to read it in? You're moving it. Sure.
So moved by Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Snow. Be it resolved, council support the City of Summerside in the bid to FCM's RFP to host an FCM Board of Directors meeting in September of 2025 or 2026.
And just for clarity, FCM is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I would call for a vote of council. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, Resolution COS 23092 is carried. And I will adjourn the first meeting. That was the easy one. On to number two. Yeah. So this is for members of the public as well. This is a planning board meeting. I'm going to try and say this before every planning board. Planning board is a committee of council under the Planning Act, Prince Edward Island. There are 4 members on planning board: Councillor Duran, Councillor Morrison, Councillor Snow. By way of our procedural bylaws here at the City of Summerside, the mayor is a member of all committees and a voting member of all committees, so I'm on planning board as well. Councillor Duran is the chair. I will call the meeting to order. Councillor Duran will chair the meeting. I'll begin by calling the planning board meeting to order here at 5:05 p.m. of June 27th, 2023. I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Duran, seconded by Councillor Morrison. I may have been looking the wrong way. All in favor of the agenda as presented, say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we move on to item 3. Any conflicts of interest with respect to any item on the agenda here this evening? Hearing none, we will move on to item 4 with respect to recommendation for zoning amendments 255 Greenwood Drive. This is where I hand over the chairing duties to Councillor Duran. Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome everyone, and thank you for all stuffing into the room tonight. I can certainly feel some eyes burning into my soul. So, as the mayor stated, just want to make sure that everyone's aware that this is the second of 3 meetings with respect to this specific application. Tonight we're going to review the information, the report that staff have prepared, and then the planning board, myself, the mayor, Deputy Mayor Snow, and Councillor Morrison, we will be voting on whether or not to endorse the application. The final decision will be made by council, and I believe that special council meeting will be July 4th, which is the same night as our committee of council meetings. Is that still okay? So July 4th will be the final decision. So I guess without further ado, I will just dig right in. So 255 Greenwood Drive zoning amendment, supporting explanation. The purpose of the official plan and zoning amendment is to allow a multi-zone development consisting of low and high-density residential housing. Background, an application from Z&C Flourish International Limited for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to low-density residential R2 zone. Also from single-family residential R1 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, and from low-density residential R2 zone to high-density residential R4 zone. The purpose of the zoning amendment is to allow semi-detached dwellings in the R2 zone and town or row housing or apartment buildings in the proposed R4 zone. In a case where multiple zones are being proposed on the same property, each proposed zone is processed separately. The applicant's plan indicates a graduation in housing forms or units from single-family dwellings to semi-detached dwelling to a low, sort of that spread from single-family to duplex to row housing to apartments. Being as the city does not have a specific zone to allow only townhousing as of right, R4 zoning was required to accommodate this housing form. A public meeting was held on June 14th, 2023, and council gave first reading on the same date. So there's a map indicating the layout of the property and all of the components to be rezoned, as well as the concept layout plan. Report under section 5.7 of the zoning bylaw. When planning board reviews a zoning bylaw amendment, it has to consider the following general criteria as applicable. Under section 8.4 of the Parks and Green Space Plan, the criteria of B, C, E, G, and H must be considered. And we'll go through those letters here now. So A, the conformity with all requirements of this bylaw. Staff comment. Any development on the proposed zones, R2 and R4, would have to meet the development standards, which consist of the setbacks, the lot sizes, etc., of the relative zone. B, conformity with the official plan. Staff comment, the land use of the subject property is currently designated as residential use as shown on the future land use plan map. The proposed residential land use does not conform with council's policies of the official plan for high-density housing. So I will now, section 5.2.2, which outlines the location of high-density housing in the official plan. The proposed amendments will not impact the Parks and Green Space Plan, so I'm just going to read out some criteria from section 5.2.2, the location of high-density housing. I'm going to read, there's 3 of them that are applicable to this application, but I'm going to read all of them just because it's important information to go through. So 5.2.2, location of high-density housing. This is in the official plan. Council intentions about locating high-density housing are important to residents concerned about potential location of row houses and apartment buildings into their predominantly low-density neighborhoods. To help allay these concerns, council lays out specific policies below on where they may allow future high-density housing, some of which elaborate on their foregoing policies for special planning and development areas. So that location criteria for high-density housing in the city of Summerside, and I will indicate which ones are, I guess, applicable to this application. They are on the screen as well. The desirability of infilling properties which are already partly developed for higher density housing. The desirability of locating high-density housing close to jobs, community, facilities and services, and of promoting pedestrian access, and that one is applicable in this situation. Opportunities for maximizing the number of opportunities for scenic views through higher density and taller residential buildings, but with protection of adequate view planes. Benefits of locating higher density housing in difficult to service areas so that they can help distribute expensive development costs among more users. That one is applicable in this situation. Opportunities for innovative mixes of higher density housing with other residential development in CDAs, and CDAs stands for comprehensive development areas. Opportunities for recycling older, non-heritage residential properties with higher density development. Opportunities for apartments in residential or commercial use buildings. And the final one, which is applicable in this situation, avoidance of negative economic and physical impacts on surrounding land uses, whether existing or proposed. So council's objective, to encourage high-density housing in specific areas, and the following are council's policies. One of them is applicable. I am going to, again, read all of them because it is an important set of information. So following are council's statements of policy with respect to high-density housing in specific areas. 1, promote high-density housing on properties already partly developed for high-density housing. 2, consider applications for high-density housing in the following situations. 3, a mix of housing types in CDAs. 4, areas presently occupied by conforming mobile home parks. And more information is on that is with Council Policy 5.3.2.5. 5, rezonings in areas presently designated for medium-density R3 zone residential use. 6, areas immediately north of the downtown, and those areas are defined as Notre Dame Street to the north, Granville Street to the east, Heather Moyse Drive to the south, and Duke Street to the west, subject to no harmful impacts on local heritage housing. And then it goes to D. I don't know if that is that just a Microsoft Word error or okay. Local heritage housing within residential/commercial buildings. 7, downtown D zone, urban core area, all districts. 8, city arterial or collector roads as referenced in section 7.1 and figure 7-1. And 9, this is the one that is applicable this evening, consider applications for high-density housing in other areas with careful consideration of council's location criteria listed above. And back to the report, C, suitability of the site for the proposed development. Staff comment, the 64.44 acre site is suitable for development and will be required to be developed as per city bylaws and standards. Should the parkland dedication for this development be determined to be on site, the land will be zoned to parkland at that time. D, compatibility of the proposed development with surrounding land uses, including both existing and projected uses. Staff comment, with the exception of a ribbon of parkland at the north and south boundaries of this property, the subject property abuts 3 existing land uses. The land to the north is agricultural, the land use to the west is residential, the land use to the east is residential and agricultural, and the land use to the south is commercial and residential. There are 2 drainage areas designated as parkland use. Both will remain. The projected land uses will be residential. The existing land uses are compatible with the projected land uses. The subject property is intended to be further subdivided and will be subject to a major subdivision process upon development. The proposed development will be constructed in a phased approach with the proposed roadways acting as buffers between low and high density residential. So when it says something will be, that is all subject to approval of this whole rezoning. E, any comments from residents or other interested persons? Staff comment, a public meeting was held on June. Ms. Dew indicated that the housing is aimed to be energy efficient, making the housing more efficient to operate and maintain and thus affordable. John Mantha presented on behalf of Z&C Flourish International Limited. Mr. Mantha provided an overview of the development and noted the need for housing in the city. He welcomed comments from the public and advised that he acknowledged the concerns and stated the developer would consider the comments. A number of public attended the meeting. The following residents spoke at the public meeting. Karen Perry, Wendy Gallant, Peggy, we didn't get the last name, Ryan Dunn, Robert Crocker, Paul Campbell, Chuck Day, Heather Sheen, Nicole Johnson, Lori Laughlin, Jen, thanks Jen, no last name, Barry, another missing last name, Ray Rushton, Ken Brown, Krista McDougall, Matthew Wedge, John Sentner. Written comments have been reviewed and recorded, and those are part of the meeting package as well. I won't read every comment that came in. It's available to view if you like. The residents raised concerns such as traffic, pedestrian safety, environmental impact, impact on police and fire services, city servicing, noise from construction, and increase in density. Councillor Duran, that's me, noted he would support the installation of traffic lights at the intersection of Pope Road and Greenwood Drive. F, adequacy of existing water, sewer, road, stormwater, and electrical services, city parking and parklands for accommodating the development and any projected infrastructure requirements. Staff comment, rezoning from R1, 32 acres, R2, 21.38 acres, and R4, 7.4 acres, to R1, 4.78 acres, R2, 9 acres, and R4, 47 acres, does have a significant change on water supply and on the loading of the sewer mains, a lift station, the treatment plant, and the lagoon. The zoning change represents an increase in sewer loading of approximately 23% for this rezoned area, which translates to a $260,500 cost to the sewer utility and an increase in water demand of approximately 33% for the rezoned area, which translates to a $122,000 cost to the water utility. The city's sewage collection and treatment systems have the capacity to handle the additional loading from the zoning changes, and the city's water supply system has the capacity to handle the additional water demand from this rezoning. The city's water main infrastructure for this development is a 250 millimeter distribution main on Greenwood Drive that loops from Pope Road to Route 2. The city's sewer main infrastructure for this development is a 200 millimeter collection main on Greenwood Drive. Traffic volume review, 255 Greenwood Drive development zoning change from existing R1 to R2 to R1 area to a new area of R1, R2, and R4 zoning. I guess before I go through that, Linda or Aaron, when we talk about Greenwood Drive having the capacity of 10,000 vehicles per day, are we referring to, like, when we talk about capacity, is that like before the road starts to crumble, or like what constitutes the capacity of a road?
I think defined by the traffic engineers, the volume of traffic on local streets, they consider up to 10,000. When they go above 10,000, they're either collectors or arterials, and when they get to certain volumes, other treatments are added on. It's either going to an next one, or we're having a wider lanes, or add additional lanes, or a double left turn, or there's different classifications. And the locals were handling a volume up to 10,000.
Okay. So the total additional volume based on the new rezoning going through, I mean, I guess I'll go through every one of them just to be complete. The R1 zone, which is looking to add an additional 18 units, 2 vehicles per unit, 4 trips a day, adding 144 vehicles per day. The R2s, 46 new units, 2 vehicles per unit, 4 trips a day, 368 vehicles per day. And the R4s, 536 new units at 1.5 vehicles per unit, 4 trips a day, 3,216 vehicles per day, with a total additional volume of 3,728 vehicles per day. The traffic volume from the existing zoning of this property is approximately 480 vehicles per day in the R1, 512 in the R2, and 432 in the R4, with a total existing volume of 1,424 vehicles per day. So change in development volume due to the rezoning will increase by 2,304 vehicles per day. For this review, all the development traffic is assumed to exit through Greenwood Drive, but this may change when the neighboring property to the east is developed. Greenwood Drive is a local city street with a capacity of 10,000 vehicles per day. The current volume for this section of Greenwood Drive is 1,431 vehicles per day, approximately based on recent traffic counts completed on this section of the street. The total volume increases on Greenwood Drive from 1,431 vehicles per day to 5,159 vehicles per day. Total volume increase due to zoning change would be 2,304 vehicles per day. I guess this represents a percentage increase of 23% of the total street capacity at full development. Approximate percent of volume from existing residents is currently 14.3% of the total street capacity at full development. Please find the attached summary of the Greenwood and Pope Road intersection review done in 2019 by WSP Traffic Engineering. That is also attached. The proposed development will access through 5 locations, 2 on Greenwood Drive and 3 future connections to the neighboring property to the east. The north end will access Greenwood Drive opposite Berkshire Drive, and the south end will access Greenwood Drive just north of Maplewood Drive. Greenwood Drive is a city local street with a capacity of less than 10,000 vehicles per day. It currently has ditches on both sides of the street with localized infilling on both the west and east sides. The other 3 future connection locations may reduce the actual traffic to Greenwood Drive, as the neighboring property to the east will have expected connections to both Central and Pope Road. See the comments in Intersection Review Report 2019, which is attached, for timeline on Greenwood and Pope intersection upgrades. The sidewalk extension will require street width upgrades to provide a location for the sidewalk extensions to be constructed along Greenwood Drive to the high-density buildings as the development phasing proceeds over the expected 10-year phased construction. The development's internal street network will conform to the city bylaws and city standard specifications and Canadian TAC standards. The street width will be 8.8 meters with curb and gutter. This development has 2 large drainage ways, and the north and south ends of the proposed development, which will accept the development's drainage, and the change in zoning will not affect the drainage. Utility power will require infrastructure upgrades given the size and density of the development. We can support the start and some early construction, but not the whole development, without upgrading the power grid. Power access is currently available off of circuit number R2 on Greenwood Drive at the location where the new side streets into the proposed development would be built. The development's full scope, approximately 600 units, is estimated to require 2,400 kilowatts of peak power, and circuit R2 is currently at 3,600 kilowatt peak load with an ultimate capacity for 6,500 kilowatts. Once fully developed, the circuit will be at an estimated 6,000 kilowatts or 92% ultimate capacity, not accounting for any other development or load growth, such as home oil to electric heat conversions elsewhere in the city on this circuit. At the 80% level of circuit capacity, approximately 5,200 kilowatts, the utility needs to begin upgrades to have reserve capacity available for extreme cold weather events, such that existing customers do not lose power in extreme weather. As such, the utility has capacity to start the development, but we will need upgrades before it's fully built out and residents moved into all the properties. Circuit number 2 has a capacity for an estimated 300 to 400 new residential units, or oil to electric heat conversions of existing homes, less for larger commercial or industrial properties. Initial projected utility needs, not counting the needs within the development, power line down Greenwood Drive from Pope Road intersection to subject property entrance is undersized and will need to be upgraded, which is 300 meters to 600 meters of power line, pending which road entrance is used. This upgrade will open up the subject property for early construction development of multiple apartments or similar structures, but not all 600 units. And long-term, for full development, utility will require feasibility review of circuit reconfigurations or construction of a new circuit. There is existing parkland, Maplewood Heights Park, and that is located within 100 meters of the subject development. The park is accessible by street or walkway network. Parkland dedication is calculated depending on the density of the housing and will be required at the time of subdivision. G, impacts from the development on pedestrian or vehicular access and safety and on public safety generally. Staff comment, vehicle access from the development will be in 2 locations to Greenwood Drive, forming 1 new 4-way and 1 new 3-way intersection. The development concept plan also has 3 locations connecting to the neighboring property to the east, which in future will have connection to both Pope Road and Central Street, noted above in section F. As shown in the traffic volume review, the new development will add approximately 37.3% of total capacity of Greenwood Drive, and with the change in zoning to a higher density zoning, the city's sidewalk network should be eventually building phase timelines. There's a map below from the Parks and Green Space Plan. The city's fire and police services will grow as resources allow to support growing population. H, compatibility of the development with environmental, scenic, and heritage resources. Staff comment, the applicant will be required to contact the Department of Environment to have a review of any watercourse or wetland areas on the property. The provincial review identifies the level of environmental risk and determines if a full environmental assessment is required. Any watercourse or wetland area must be identified on the future subdivision plan. No development will be permitted within the watercourse wetland area buffers. The survey plan would also identify any easements, right-of-ways, etc. on the property. There are no compatibility issues regarding scenic or heritage resources. The applicant must meet provincial regulations regarding construction site runoff in proximity of watercourses. I, impacts on city finances and budgets. Staff comment, the cost associated with upgrading city infrastructure. J, other matters as specified in this bylaw. Staff comment, not applicable. K, other matters as considered relevant. Staff comment, the layout of the proposed development is subject to a major subdivision to allow the subdivision of lands. The preliminary subdivision layout must be reviewed by planning board and approved by council. The street layout must be orderly and following. See the map below indicating future roadway connections in the area. The application being considered does not include any portion of PID number 70748. Staff review. City staff supports the application for a portion of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to low-density residential R2 zone. Staff do not support the application for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, and from low-density residential R2 zone to high-density residential R4 zone as shown on the applicant's plan. An appropriate transition in zones, i.e. R1, R2, R3, is sound planning and rezoning some additional smaller areas to R4 around the green spaces in the southeast and northeast corners of the property is appropriate. Staff recommends the city consider creating a new medium-density zone, planned unit residential development to allow townhouse/row house, i.e. up to 4 units as of right, but not allow apartment buildings. And if council was to consider that, that would be at a future time. We wouldn't be able to just create a zone for this application. So no, that's just something that staff recommend we do sooner than later, I guess. So as per section 5.10, part B3 of the zoning bylaw, the planning board shall make a recommendation to council on this application before it is approved or denied. The planning board recommendation, whether carried or defeated, will be brought forward to council for a final decision. So before we call for the planning board vote, I guess I would like to acknowledge that both as a member of planning board and as a counselor for the ward, this was and continues to be really a far from easy process. I'm sure it will continue to be a challenge leading right up to the decision on July 4th. Myself and the other members of planning board have had to balance the input from staff in the form of the report that we've reviewed tonight, along with the pressure of knowing that there's a desperate need for all types of housing in our city and in our province. Everything from low-income affordable apartment units all the way up to the availability of detached homes and higher-end apartment units. We've had to sort of balance all that against the input of a very high majority of residents, obviously, in the area. So I will address the folks who are here this evening, but of course I'm speaking to anyone that couldn't attend as well. So as a planning board member and a counselor for your area, I found it particularly challenging. I must admit that when I tried putting myself in your shoes, I found many of the concerns to be quite valid, particularly those concerning the traffic. Traffic counts and road capacity and that are good data sets to have for planning, but I think they fail to take into account the environment and the day-to-day issues that arise from people's driving habits and the presence of pedestrians and some safety concerns in general. There's no question that the effect of an additional 600 units would place on traffic patterns in the area. I think we've all seen it, and I presume we've all probably experienced it. The intersection at Pope and Greenwood in particular, depending on the time of day, just doesn't work the way that it is now. So Regardless of whether or not this rezoning or these rezonings take place, I know we have that Pope Greenwood intersection on the agenda for the next committee of council meeting on July 4th, which actually is the same night that we vote on this. So I hope to have council support to get some traffic signals in there sooner than later. But I also wanted to mention as well that when the topic of speeding comes up, particularly on Greenwood Drive, I can't help but point out that nobody's using Gavin Estates as a shortcut to get somewhere else. So the people that are doing the speeding are the folks who live there and your neighbors and your household members. So I commend the community for coming together, and I know you were also organized in getting around and talking to each other. So I recommend maybe taking a similar approach if you really want to take a bite out of the speeding issue as well, along with police enforcement, of course. And anyway, this isn't a lecture on speeding, but I wanted to just point that out. Something I noticed. It's the Amazon drivers too, I know. So now that I've gotten that off my chest, I guess we can move on. I will, before I ask for the vote, we'll see if. Oh, yeah. By all means, yeah, I know there's some petitions to go around, and it looks like a lot of paper. Some trees were used. Before we do call for the vote for planning board, I'll eventually ask if anybody else would like to speak in council or planning board, but we've all heard the report, and based on the fact that the Greenwood Drive rezoning, I guess, does not accord with council's official plan policies for locations of high-density housing, as well as the fact that the proposed location of high-density housing has some negative land use impacts regarding traffic flow and the necessity to enter and exit through low-density zones, as well as some of the points and comments I've made. I will be this evening supporting my residents, and I will be voting in favor of not endorsing the application. If anybody wants to... It wasn't, I assure everyone in this room on both sides, it took right up until 10 minutes ago to really make a decision, and I know it's not, it's like that a lot here, so it's not something that's decided well in advance. So just please know that was a very difficult thing to do, but we still have a decision to make as a council. So I'll certainly, if anybody else wants to speak, by all means, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Councillor Ron. I just got this petition, I just opened it, and I need to say, I guess, a good job getting around and getting signatures. But when I first opened it, I think the first one was in Richmond, one was in, they're all over the city. It's not so much the area. I fail to see, I fail to see how somebody in Richmond, in all fairness, to everybody in the gallery, should have input or sign a petition on what's going on within our city. I understand we are against something and we want to speak out against it, and I assure you, you guys are doing a great job organizing, but to get... And that's fine, but we are trying to look at a zoning for a specific area. It does, some are Granville Street, some are wherever, and I do understand it's the tax center, but it just, that's the first thing I noticed. I would like to know, there's a recommendation to not recommend the R4. Can we just go over that on the reason why the R4 was not recommended, just so we're all clear on the reasons? Aaron, Linda? if you want to read,
It wasn't recommended as presented on the applicant's plan, so there are criteria that council can review and consider for high-density housing. So we weren't saying there was no R4 being considered, it just was not being considered as it was shown on the plan.
the amount of, is that what you mean?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
And the location as well. So there is a future road network, and those can be considered. I think that was criteria 8 of the council's policies or whatever. So that, if that road goes across from, or when it does, from Greenwood Drive to Central Street, that would also be considered
Okay,
in those areas.
thank you. I might have some more questions.
And also, the other, as we've mentioned, a large portion in the middle of that pocket was for 4-unit buildings, and right now, the only way to accommodate that with certainty is in the R4. So it made the mass of the R4, we didn't do the math exactly, but almost double the area in the center, that's R3. If we get direction to provide a specific loan to zone to allow row housing in the city, that middle section would not have to be R4, it would be some other zone. But so right now, the only way to accommodate it is make all of it R4, the row housing as well as.
Because of our current zoning.
We do allow it on a one-off basis. We have had them, but it's a restricted use process that's only valid for 1 year. So if someone comes in with a property and says, I want to put a row house, we have a few of them in the city now, but they're usually just one lot at a time, and it wasn't a major development looking at, and the process is just like this. We go through restricted use, but it's valid for 1 year. So if this is a 10-year project, whenever they happen to get to that section, those permissions would expire by the time. So there's not really a valid process right now to process those through a restricted use process that we have now. So our recommendation was to come up with, if that's what's happening and we haven't getting more row house, townhouse type buildings, to create a zone specifically for that, so you know that's exactly what you're getting in that. And later on, it couldn't just be an R4 apartment building, it would only be allowed to build those types of units. So the mass of that R4, what's proposed, would drop drastically.
So should we be considering only rezoning, and I think that's what you're saying, a portion of it, and then leave the rest totally off the board for rezoning? Or
That's why it was presented in pieces where the existing zoning is kind of a odd shaped and it kind of overlaps. So that's why there was a number of resolutions brought forward to say, it gives you flexibility to say, I agree with this part, I agree with this part, I don't agree with this part. It would allow you to approve or disapprove or deny certain sections based on, and then if there was areas to do something different, we could come back and revise or create a zone that's. We've had it before where people like something and they didn't like everything in an R4, but we want just the one use, and we went through restricted use to allow that. But so that's kind of the mass of, it's a large mass of R4, although some of it was being proposed in their concept to be a lesser use than apartment buildings.
yeah, so we had that I recall us doing some rezonings in the past where it was something that was rezoned years ago. I'm thinking of a specific area, but I won't bring it up, but it was rezoned years ago, and then as an R4 with an intent for, I think at that point it was what we're talking about, townhouses. Then it came back and it went to apartment buildings after the fact, but after the fact it's too late because it's already permissible. Okay. Just one more question though. So am I right in saying there's currently R4 already zoned in that area, sort of directly behind? So when I look at the map under the area being rezoned, there's sort of a yellow spot that's not in the rezoning area, but it shows R4.
When the zoning happened, I don't know if it was 2006, that everything south of that parkland was all 4 different zones. R1 strip along Greenwood Drive. They then made an R2 section. The rest of the center was R1. And then when you get out to Pope Road, they made it commercial and a pocket in behind R4. So that happened 06, 07, thereabouts. So it was all farmland. They made about 4 different zones at that time. And now since the recent change in ownership, they're requesting to make a change to, it got developed, the commercial got developed to the church and the Nissan dealership. The yellow pocket in behind is R4 now, that's not developed.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. Great turnout. Aaron, I was just looking at some of the numbers there. We had said that has a significant change on water supply and unloading of the sewer mains, lift station, treatment plant, and the lagoon. Is there a lot of upfront costs that the residents through their water sewer utility will be? I know that we've had an increase last year and this year, whatever, and anyway, I guess, can you speak to me about the numbers and how that's going to have an immediate or
So,
not?
Where it was a large property, we looked at the entire, I hate to say it's the catchment area where that sewer lands and any infrastructure that's below it and how it gets treated. So typically, a infrastructure size for the zoning that exists of the day. So right now, in this case, we're considering going from a lighter density to a heavier density.
Right.
So typically, developers are responsible if there's a significant change in the lift station that's downstream. At full development, if it requires upsizing that lift station, they pay a portion based on the area that they occupy or that's been rezoned. So that was one part of it. The other part of it, we said, okay, we're asked to say, okay, what is this large, if it went to full development, when it gets to full development, do we have the infrastructure to handle it? That was yes. We also looked and said, okay, let's call it 600 units. I think it was a differential of 400 units. What does that 400 extra units mean as far as water and sewer supply? So then they calculate, okay, if those 400, I hate to say this is kind of detail, but what does that 400 units mean to that treatment plant for flow? What does that mean if it's someone goes to the lagoon? So then we calculated out what those charges would be. And then we said, okay, well, we also then have 400 new or additional customers. And based on the current utility rates, it was all based on current.
Right.
There's more in the revenue side coming in from the 400 new customers to cover off the operation and additional maintenance for that. So that was good to know that leaves us with I'll say to the good, to allow some of that money that's excess to go towards future capital. But the individual part of the lift station itself, it's still in good shape, but we would take a charge for the increased flow to that lift station to be set aside to go towards when that lift station has to be replaced. So it breaks out. Sorry, I'll have to dig through the numbers here, but overall, the extra flow that's caused by there and the cost to pump that and treat that at the treatment plant, as well as at the lagoon, is more than covered off by the rates we capture from those 400 additional customers.
Okay.
But we would apply a charge of like $150,000 or something. That would be the cost of their portion of a future lift station change.
Okay. And similar question around the electric utility. It's saying that there's going to be greater pressure on our utility. We may have to rebuild that whole circuit at full occupancy or whatever.
I'll speak loosely on the utility that I'm not heavily dealing with it, but they've stated yes, on full development of that circuit. I think we have 12 circuits throughout the city and they balance the load on those circuits. So whether people or different areas have to get shifted to different, so we have a balance across all the city of those zones. And then whether they have to increase capacity or that's what they're stating there, that initially they had enough to handle, I think he said 200 or 400 of the units, not the full 600. So by the time you get to that, they have time to make their capital improvements and changes and balancing across the entire city as far as balancing up the load in the circuits so all circuits have the same amount or creating a new circuit. That's my interpretation.
Okay. But there'd be no immediate.
The only immediate, they said there was enough power and enough inner city for growth to handle another 400 in this area, this circuit. They did say, I think they'd have to upgrade from Greenwood Drive to whatever portion that they if the developer phased this, there's two driveways. I'll say the south one, or if they go up opposite Berkshire, they would have to upgrade the pole line on Greenwood to get to the start of those developments.
Okay. And my final comment is around exits out of that subdivision. I know the ones that are there.
Yeah.
But I know there's two leading on to Greenwood Drive. Anyway, I have concerns with that. The reason I'm in this business is because I had to fight to get another exit out of our subdivision. And I just think there needs to be a real good look at putting another exit out of there somewheres.
And
But-
I guess what Linda has got up on the screen there is that what she's highlighted in light blue was their concept of street layouts.
Yeah.
2 would go to the left or to Greenwood Drive. 3 would go towards the east to the future landowner, future development. Those layouts that are in there to the right were concepts from a previous owner. They obviously don't line up with the streets with these people, so they were just a concept of the previous landowner years ago to say, yes, your subdivision is going to have to connect to the field to the left to allow. So in the long haul, there'll be 5 exits out of that subdivision, 2 on Greenwood Drive and 3 to the east or future development as the land to the east got developed as well. But there would have to be 2 out of this one itself by themselves. If that makes sense. 2 to the left on Greenwood Drive.
Yeah.
And then as part of this developer, they have to develop roads, at least 2, over to the eastern boundary to allow the next person to connect on.
I realize
Yep.
that, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, but if this whole thing was developed, or allowed to be developed, there's just the 2 coming off of Greenwood Drive that you're putting people on the same road, right? There's no.
Correct.
And that's what happened to us.
Yeah.
So that's my issue, and I think it's a
Yep.
valid one, so, thank
How,
you.
just right, building on that, how far away are we from the reality of the French school area entrance exit? Is that just?
That's
is this
totally up
developed?
to the landowner when they choose to develop their land, and wherever they develop.
No, I know, but where?
They did
I
one-
mean, in time.
When they did one phase extension, Acadia Drive, the extension, they looped around there. They have 10 lots there. It's whenever they either choose to develop the rest of their property and connect, as there's a light gray on there to say what's left is the width of a street and lots on both sides to where the stub is at the end of the French school from 20-some years ago. And yeah,
So that could be a year, it could be 10, it could be 20, just.
whenever the developer or landowner decides to develop that land, yeah.
Councillor
Just
Morrison?
a question, Aaron. I believe on the first evening that we were here, the developer made comments that they wanted to work with the residents, or that's what I understood. I was just wondering if they have notified tech services in any way of maybe making any changes to their plan at this time, or is it still straight ahead with the original one?
I think they proceeded with the plan as it stated, as was presented. Obviously, if we'll be going back to them if it's not successful, and definitely identifying that there's potential for another zone to accommodate the R4, and it would have to sit in abeyance until, or stay with the existing zoning until such time that zone was through, because that zone wouldn't be specifically for this property. It would be, if we created a new zone, R7 or something, that would accommodate those. That would be citywide. That wouldn't just be for a property owner. Yeah. So no, they haven't provided a revised layout. Proceed with the layout that was presented. And yep.
Okay, so with that, I guess, Mayor, Your Worship, sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Just, thank you, Justin, and thank you to everyone here today. This is an important process, and it's an important step in the process, and it is always good to see public engagement. It's always good to see people involved and interested, and community working together, regardless of whether you're supportive or not supportive of what the objective ultimately is. First, I just wanted to take a note that this has been a difficult process, a difficult review. I, as mayor, in the past, mayors haven't sat on the planning board. I decided to do so because, one, our procedural bylaws said so, and the second is that I didn't think it was always fair for council to have to make what often are the most difficult of their decisions, because they involve residents and things that affect their day-to-day life. And obviously, they are balancing that against the requirements, the goals, the policies set out in our official plan, but also against the realities of where we are today and why the people up here are elected to make decisions to make sure that all of our residents succeed, to make sure that all of our residents, those who are here with us today and those who will come to Summerside in the future, enjoy a high quality of life where they can raise their families and have places to live. And that's really, really important. So whether ultimately you agree with me or not, or whether you, the public, council, the applicant, I've always used data, facts, and evidence, listened to all of the comments, read all of the comments, and proceeded in maybe an overly lawyerly fashion here to review the process in the way that I think the process is supposed to be reviewed. So I wrote a number of comments here, partly because I didn't want to miss anything. To be totally frank, have had a lot of sleepless nights and headaches associated with some of this project because there are two significant, really, we got some big issues here, and some big issues that I talk about frequently all the time, and then obviously some big issues for the people who are here in the community, in this particular section of the community. And those two big issues, obviously, are the ones that are affecting you, the ones that we've seen in the public comments, and then the big issues of how we manage and ensure growth, to make sure that it is done in a way that is sensible, that is beneficial, to make sure that we have the people we need here in our future in order to replace the aging workforce that we have, to make sure that we have the nurses, the contractors, the plumbers that our older adults are going to need, the caretakers, the caregivers that people are going to need in our community, and to make sure that all those people have the right types of housing. Summerside right now, 49% of our homes are single-family homes. The reality, the economic reality of today is that that isn't where things are going, and we are in the middle of a housing crisis. That housing crisis is affecting all of us. It is affecting some of us more than others, but it ultimately will affect all of us. Whether we have young kids, if we do not create the types of housing that they can get into and get on pathways towards home ownership so they can form households, they will leave. If we don't have the housing for our seniors and our older adults that works for them, and I'm sure there are some in this room, there are many in the community who are struggling with that point in time when you no longer want to take care of the whole home when all the family, the kids have left, you need other places to live. And the reality is today in Summerside, there simply are not enough places to live. We have a vacancy rate of less than 0.5%. We have an average house price in Prince Edward Island of $380,000. House prices have risen drastically because of things that none of us have any control over. So these are big decisions. There are serious, significant needs. Our city is intending to continue to grow, and I am very happy and proud and enjoy every single day that we get to manage the pressures and the stresses that go with growth as opposed to those of decline. I'm glad we are here in a public forum, disagreeing in some ways and sharing our thoughts and our comments and agreeing in others about something that is ultimately good. We are growing. We are bringing people that we need here in our community. We are trying to create new opportunities for people as opposed to the alternative, which is a community that is shrinking, that young people are not staying in, that houses are becoming vacant and empty. That is a much scarier situation to be in. So while these are difficult decisions, at the same time, there is a positive light here. We are dealing with the pressures of growth that are manageable, and I'd much rather be doing that than managing the pressures of decline. I also wanted to share with you my process here. We do have two decisions to be made here. Recommendations, votes to recommend or to not recommend. Two recommendations as a planning board. We have the one which is the R1 to R2, and then we have the R2 to R4. I would say off the start, I think those independently essentially should be looked at independently. I do think that this package probably should have considered each one of those separately and assessed the criteria with respect to each one of those separately. I think some of the information that's been presented here has been combined in an awkward way, which makes it difficult to assess what we are supposed to assess in a very clear way. Again, maybe that's my lawyerly process coming to fore. So when I prepared for this, after watching that first council meeting, I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, trying to continue to attract and support our sports and entertainment tourism Summerside, which is one of the roles that I have, which is trying to sell and support and grow our city and attract events and people. First, thanks to Councillor Snow, who chaired that meeting, and Councillor Duran for what was a very well-run meeting, and for everyone who came and shared their comments. It is difficult to just watch on YouTube. There's no question about it. When you cannot see the eyes of people, when you cannot read body language, when it is harder to understand how tone influences people's thoughts, it is always a challenge. So I certainly apologize for the inability to have a full view of everything, but thanks to the wonders of modern technology, I was able to be able to follow along, and to be honest, to watch it again, which is also really helpful. So with that process, I've also reviewed and considered the entire official plan. I know in the package that we're given, we are talking about a narrow set of criteria, which is section 5.22 of the official plan. We cannot, I do not, you can do what you want, but I can't look at that independently of the entire official plan as a whole. I need to make sure that I look at the goals and objectives that the city has set for itself at the beginning as a whole for a city, and then I need to look at the goals and objectives in even this section which this applies, and this section is residential. Now, by doing that, I continue to add more conflicts to my internal assessment. Also, ensure to review the Parks and Green Spaces plan, although the criteria set out are the same enumerated, which is listed criteria. There are a number, I think there are 5 or 6. Those need to be considered and reviewed in context of the policies of the Parks and Green Spaces plan. And then also on our zoning bylaw, which obviously bears some relevance here. I've had the chance to read all of your comments. I've heard from others. I'm sure most of council has, whether it's in social circles, but that's how it is. That's what we signed up for here. And also in a number of other forums. I'm glad that the comments presented, I'm glad there are official comments. To be honest, I'm glad that Facebook comments don't have to be considered. And I say that because sometimes, unfortunately, when people get emotional about things that matter, and that's totally reasonable and fair, they say things that they perhaps wouldn't do in a public forum, or that suggest that something was said anonymously. And there's certainly a number of comments that have come through, come to my attention that I frankly am disappointed in. But I know that does not represent the broad community here. What it does do, unfortunately, is sometimes it then distracts from what are really relevant and valid concerns. So I do my best to make sure that those are entirely cut out. So I'm just going through my notes and seeing what I've already covered, because I'm already way off script. As I said, I know ultimately council will have some big decisions to make. That's what council will do. I think everyone here has a role they can play. And I mean that from the public, from the applicant, whether it's council, staff, to get our community to a better place. Now, what type of role you play is entirely up to you. First off, I think the process itself as a whole is difficult and problematic. We've spoken about this before, council, just not usually, we don't have many people listening. The process itself is a challenge because we get a rezoning application that we're supposed to look at separate and apart from any development that's associated with that. And that works and makes sense when we're reviewing an official plan or going over the zoning bylaws separate and apart from any kind of development. But the reality is when rezoning applications come before this body, they are here because somebody wants to build something and do it in a way that we haven't contemplated for. We have some challenges with some of that contemplation. Our official plan was passed in 2019, so you would think it'd be about a year or 2 years to develop that. And a lot of things have changed in the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm not just referring to COVID. The city has grown by leaps and bounds, which has created all kinds of the pressures that we're seeing manifest themselves, like here today. So I wanted to quickly go through, I hope I don't bore everybody, but you came, so I might as well take you through my criteria review. And you're welcome to leave at any time, obviously. I, in fact, cannot. I have no choice. I have to go through. So, Planning Board shall consider the criteria listed in 8K of 5.7 in the bylaw. Councillor Duran set that out. And then fully consider the applicable parks and green spaces plan under the listed criteria B, C, E, G, and H. And that itself is just a minimum checklist for review. I don't think that there was a full consideration of the noted criteria under the Parks and Green Spaces Plan that clearly laid out in the report, to be honest. I'm going to go through them sort of in order that they're presented in the package, so those of you that have the package can follow along. So these are the criteria set out in our zoning bylaw. So conformity with the requirements of this bylaw. I don't have anything to add or to comment with respect to what staff has set out here. And again, remember, we're bunching two decisions into one because in R1, 2, and R2, or in R2, 2, and R4, to me at least, to track different application of some of these criteria, which puts us in a difficult spot. I would say, though, under the, which one did I start with? A, hopefully. Yeah, under A, with the conformity of the requirements of this bylaw that was raised by council and highlighted there by Director Aaron and Linda, that we certainly have a gap in our zoning, in our current zoning bylaws. We do not permit any as of right townhouse developments. Townhouses are fantastic ways for people to form households. They are affordable, they are easier to build, they also can help fit within they're not an apartment, so in some ways a townhouse to a lot of people, yes, it increases density, but I live in Bluebell, we have a whole bunch of townhouses around the corner. Bluebell, I know it came up in some of the comments, Bluebell surrounded by R3 and R4 zoning, just an FYI, and everything is still okay. But we have a series of townhouses along McEwen Road. Yeah, it is all, yeah, if you look at the map. All of McEwen Road, we have a series of townhouses, and those are filled with all kinds of people. We have seniors there, we have newcomers there, we have young families there, and it's a great little piece of the community. They also spend a lot of time on their front steps and build neighborhood and build community. So I think that's certainly a gap. I really hope that Planning Board in the future and Council looks at either a PURD zone or amending our R3 zoning bylaws in order to ensure that we can have townhouses as of right for R3 zoning. Because really, if you look at a zoning map of all of Summerside, R3 zoning is probably the one that you will see the least amount of. You will see R4 zoning all over the city. You'll see R1 obviously all over the city and R2, but we don't have a whole lot of R3, and it certainly fills part of the gap. So I'll kind of leave that with how we're going to proceed on that. I guess the last is and this is where I've struggled the most, to be honest, the R1 to R2, I think it is recommended here, staff has recommended it. I certainly will be voting in favor of that from R1 to R2. It is the R2 to the R4 that I struggle with, and particularly, like I said, that center gap, because when you plan communities, you want to step up and step down density and development. And we have now an application that has an as-of-right apartment builds for what I think is too much. Yep. But, yeah, you didn't let me get to my but. But that sort of centerpiece, and I don't know if this was at the first meeting or not, in the presentation from the applicant showing where townhouses were originally going to be proposed, and if you look at that section right there, sorry, you can't see where I'm pointing. Obviously, the large, where those in that section. It would be ideal for this to be the applicant to have been able to come forward with an R3 zoning application and request for that space. And I'll sort of come back to as I go through some of the considerations, but ultimately that and then a continuation of some of the townhouses further to the east in order to connect to the next lot and then the next lot. One of the things we always have to consider here is that we got to start somewhere. Someone's going to have to develop there. I think there are 3 parcels in here that go all the way across to Central Street. When those are all developed, one, we need the housing. We need those to get developed. When those are developed, I think it set out here there should be 5 entry points for those. And a lot of what I would ultimately think may end up happening is that fewer people will use Greenwood Drive, because in order to get across town, you might be cutting through whatever the other developments are, if those developments go ahead. It is always a challenge, though, to think, okay, this is going to take a number of years, or this is going to take 10 years. But housing developments do take time, and they're not always very easy to get. So, next, with respect to the B here, the conformity with the official plan, I thought that the comments that are provided here were too narrow for 3 reasons. As I said at the beginning, planning board must consider the entirety of the official plan as a whole. That is all set out here in the official plan. I'm not going to read all of this to you. You're all certainly welcome to do so on your own time, but it does set out right at the very beginning here as to what the objective of the official plan here. And the official plan is not a checklist that we say check, 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 check. The official plan is a guide. The goals, objectives, and policies, and those are all separate in the official plan. There are goals before each section, and then there are objectives, and there are policies under those objectives, are a direction for decision makers regarding particular courses of action. They're intended to guide decisions regarding the review and approval of development proposals and consistency to amend the city zoning bylaws. And as it says here as well, consistency is relative but not absolute. Projects and proposals that implement one or more policies that are not in conflict with the overall goals of the plan are judged to be consistent. So when you see the policies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or I think some of them go up to 9, the goal here really is if one of those policies is not inconsistent with the overall objectives of the plan, then that policy is an avenue to give consideration for council. And then it says as well, when weighing competing objectives, greater weight should be given to achieving overall policy objectives on an area and citywide scale rather than site-specific scale. And decision makers should consider the cumulative impacts they make with a number of similar decisions over time. Essentially, I think what all this reads is that council's role and planning board's role is to look at the entire official plan, look at the sections of the official plan, and interpret them in a reasonable way, given the context of what's before them. None of that is included in the information here, so which again, even just reference to it would be helpful in the future to identify what sections we're dealing with. So again, when you go in and look into some of this stuff, and I hate to sort of take everyone through this, but I think it's really important to understand the process that we kind of have to go through, because sometimes it's really easy to just look at something and make up your mind and then move on without having full consideration. This is the... So we have an overall vision of a livable community here in Summerside. It's all set out here. It starts with, we want to live in a community that provides housing, jobs, services, health to all of our residents, and so on and so forth. Broader mix of housing and affordable choices, a distinct, attractive community, and a sense of place and public realm. There are, I think, about 10 things there that we need to consider. So we have to look at that, I do, at least as a planning board member, and consider all of that in making any types of decision. Also need to look at what previous council has set out in an official plan with respect to fiscal responsibility, social responsibility and inclusion, which says create diverse communities with accessibility to affordable housing, healthcare, education, public amenities for all citizens. The social inclusion pieces, efficient land uses, and anyway, you can read through it as you wish. What is consistent throughout this, though, is a need to promote higher density development, promote mixed land uses, a range of housing types, less emphasis on automobiles, better pathways and trail systems. And that has to guide our overall consideration of just the factors that have been presented to us here. Then within the plan itself, there's a section called residential, which is where we'll find the criteria. But the residential also sets out goals here, and the goals are to accommodate diversified residential needs of all residents for different housing types, present housing composition, taking into account composition, family age, needs, the need for affordable housing, and the needs of elderly and disabled. And I would just take a note that apartments are built to code for accessibility, are built to accessibility codes. And currently, I would challenge anyone to try and find any apartment here in Summerside, and I can't imagine how difficult it must be for people who are struggling with accessibility, let alone the countless calls that I get on a regular basis of people saying they cannot find a place to live and they don't know where they're going to live in the next month. So we have to consider all of that. And then last, in this instance, planning board's being asked to consider an application for high-density housing in another area, and requires us to look at what are the location criteria listed in section 5.22 of the official plan. And those, I think, are set out here as well. Some are highlighted, some are not. Just because they're highlighted, sorry, Councillor Arnold, I wasn't going to correct you, but just because they're highlighted doesn't mean they are applicable. All of them are applicable if the council would then attribute different weight to some of them. Some of them would be relevant, some of them would not. There are a number here that obviously have no relevance with respect to this application. Others could have relevance or could not. But for the most part, the only one really missing here is this one that I don't even understand, which is the opportunities for maximizing the number of opportunities for scenic views through higher density and taller residential buildings. I read that to kind of be like, if we have tall buildings, people have a nice view in the building, but that doesn't look the other way. So I'm not sure exactly what that is intended to mean, but not everything in here makes total sense. But it is, then we get to the point, once we've considered the goals and the overall objectives, then we get to the point of identifying the criteria for a high-density application. So if you can scroll down there, Linda, since I think you've got the, right. So then here we are. We have another objective. There are a number of objectives. This is one. Here are some policies under this objective. Number 9 is to consider applications for high-density housing in other areas. This would be one, with careful consideration of council's location criteria listed above. There probably is a case to make that number 8 is also relevant here. City arterial or collector roads is referenced in section 7.1 because figure 7.1 because Pope Road is a collector road in the city, and this development, while not immediately on the road, is pretty much adjacent to that space. So now we start to get into the details, which is when we go into the location criteria. They're listed on page 88 of the official plan, and they should be set. Are they set out here as well, Linda? I'm not sure. Are they? I think they were, because I think Justin read them all. Did he? Yeah, they're up. Page 6 of the meeting pack. Oh, down. Sorry. I'll just have them in front of me. I don't want to, but I think they're instructive to look at. That's not, I don't know, I can't see. Yes, those are correct. Great. Thank you, Counselor. You knew exactly where they were. So again, we need to look at the 5.22 says council's intentions about locating high-density housing are important to residents concerned about potential location of row houses and apartment buildings into their predominantly low-density neighborhoods. I'm going to sort of take a quick little section and park the whether whose neighborhood is what here, because I received a lot of comments from people who, in my opinion, live a significant distance away from this development itself. I certainly attribute a lot more weight to residents living closer, particularly those on Greenwood Drive, who would be directly affected with traffic, directly affected with construction traffic. The further you get from me, when I attribute weight to public comments, the further away you get from the space, the less weight I would attribute to any comment. So if someone writes and says, I don't want to apartments in my neighborhood, and I live on Century Court, I attribute less weight to that than someone on Greenwood Drive who says, look, I have some genuine concerns with, traffic and that street, which, as Councillor Ron has raised, and I've spoken to a number of people in the area as well, I also would have concerns with prior to this to begin with. To help allay these concerns, Council lays out specific policies where they may allow future high-density housing, some of which elaborate on foregoing policies in special planning and development areas. Then we get to the criteria. The first one, the desirability of infilling properties, I don't think is entirely relevant here. If anything, it suggests that we're not infilling properties that are partly developed for higher density housing to begin with. So I would have that noted as a no. I'm going to try and balance, but with a lower amount of weight. The second is the desirability of locating high-density housing close to jobs, community facilities, and services, and promoting pedestrian access. This one I think is really important because there's no question that as this area and this field at this point in the past may have been the suburbs. This is not the suburbs anymore, Summerside. This development is very close to our major commercial center. We have major commercial centers, our downtown and our uptown, and we also have secondary commercial centers identified in our official plan, one of which is immediately south right on Pope Road. And with the Nissan dealership, the Gospel Church, there is commercial activity there. The goal of high-density housing is to make sure that people who work in these places can live close to them so they can walk and they can access those places. Also take into account the fact that we are single biggest employer in Summerside is right there across the street, which again goes towards weight towards having, in my opinion at least, having higher density in that area because you have more people working in that space, and we want, and it sets out in our official plan, and we want to make sure that we have more people walking from place to place. That is one of the things that we have to look at, that our communities are more walkable, that we reduce our impacts on the environment by decreasing our reliance on cars, and that we put people close to where they work. So I attribute that on the yes side. I told you you're not going to like everything I have to say, so I warned you. The next is the opportunity, the maximizing views. I'd have no comment on that. The next, the benefits of locating higher density housing into difficult to service areas so they can help distribute expensive development costs across more users. I don't think that does that here. I don't think this is a difficult to service area, but it does, one of the things we also have to look at from the city is our finances and our fiscal responsibility. It is always cheaper to deploy sewer, water, and electrical infrastructure and roads infrastructure to higher density areas than it is to single-family homes. So if everyone wants to continue to live in single-family homes, you have to pay more taxes to build more roads because it goes a lot further. You have to pay more taxes to increase the sewer lines because, again, you got to get water to a certain number of people when they live in a smaller area. It's cheaper to do so, and it's better for the environment and better for the planet. But on that, given the fact that it is not a difficult to service area, I don't have any opinion on that. The next three are all not applicable. And then the last one is one that I certainly struggle with the most, in part because some of the recommendations here, I think, confused this criteria with one of the other requirements that we need to look at. And that's the avoidance of negative economic or physical impacts on the surrounding land uses, whether existing or proposed. Certainly, as has been raised here and raised by a couple of the other councillors, traffic is a real concern for the residents in the area, without a doubt. I think if you read the traffic report in here, it, for the most part, suggests that installing lights when the traffic count increases, this would certainly, as proposed here at least, would increase the traffic count, in my opinion, at least to a point where a lighting system at Pope and Greenwood would be necessary. I think Greenwood Drive as well, north of Pope itself, is particularly troublesome because of the proximity of the ditches to the roads. I know a lot of you would know from walking there. I've walked up and down there. It is a dangerous place to walk. If you add on, particularly in the wintertime, you are on the edge of the road, on the edge of a ditch, and I am sure there have been more than one person who's fallen into those ditches, and you don't want someone walking, particularly who may struggle with mobility issues, to fall into a ditch, particularly in the middle of the wintertime. Bad things can happen. I would absolutely, yeah. That's a different discussion, Bruce. Certainly, and I've been an advocate for this. I've always talked about the importance of having sidewalks. You put sidewalks in front of your house, it increases the value of your home. It increases the ability for you to connect with your neighbors, for your kids to make friends. There are a few things that increase property values. That is one. Another one is development, although I'm sure that people maybe don't totally agree with that, but that's what the evidence and the data suggests. The next is, in the staff comments, there was a comment here on compatibility. I think this was in the appendix. Sorry, I'm going to find it. Yeah, it's in the, what appendix is this? Appendix B. There are a number of planning officer comments. One to the third one is the negative land uses impacts regarding traffic flow. I don't really see that as negative land use. I see that as something that needs to be managed. But the next one really is the regarding compatibility and physical impacts of proposed high density in the surrounding area. Under this section, there's no consideration of compatibility. What that even means in this case, and then it says it's not compatible and in keeping with the general area. That is not we have to sort of, if we want to look at it from the overall perspective, if compatibility is in here and as part of one of our goals, potentially, but it's not set out in these specific criteria. So I have attributed little to no weight there. And I would say when you talk about negative economic, negative economic impacts on the surrounding land uses. When you sit in my chair, I have to look out for the entire city. And as I said earlier, if we are not building housing in the city, we are negatively impacting our economy, and we're negatively impacting the lives of so many people we share this community with. So I'd sort of take note of that. Would also suggest as well, it does say it's not compatible. This parcel it does abut agricultural. It has R1. It has R2. It is adjacent to R4. It's I know there's a small pieces on the bottom, but there's almost a quarter of this. 3/4 of the bottom, the southern portion is R4. We have C2. We have R4 coming up on the other side, R2, and we have park space, which will be one day an incredible trail network, so a lot of you can walk all the way to Central Street and beyond to Granville and enjoy what are natural sways, I think. So in terms of compatibility, it depends how you look at it. Yes, it maybe is not compatible with an R1 development that is next to it, but in certain sections, it's certainly compatible with some of the adjacent properties. The last, suitability, I don't have any comments on that. That's number C here, compatibility. Now we're back into compatibility, and in the staff report, staff says that it's compatible here with the projected land uses. I already made note of that. E is the public comments, which I'm going to address at the end. F is the water and sewer. I personally am comfortable with the costs associated with the increase of water and sewer and electrical loads for the future. We already we are lucky that we have such strong water and sewer infrastructure here in the city of Summerside to handle a lot of the growth that we've been seeing. There are a lot of communities that do not, and they're struggling with that right now. They are way behind with water and sewer. We, in a lot of ways, are overbuilt, which has been great because we positioned ourselves to be successful and to be able to take advantage of this maritime migration and the trend of growth here. So we're in a very good position there, and we certainly, and staff have mentioned, that there is would be a need for increased electoral infrastructure, but that's certainly nothing new, particularly as we look towards electrification across our community. We're getting more and more pressures on our electric utility. Parkland, I have a note here as well. Again, this goes back to the process point, and I've struggled with this as a resident, and I've struggled with this as a mayor. I think we have to do a very serious review on how we, and the process that we use towards developments like this one or this proposed development and rezoning. I think it is creates confrontation. I think it the current process. I think it limits the amount of information that's then presented. I think it does not enable us to, as a community, have a proper dialogue about what we need and how we can give and take as a community in order to see some success overall. Again, we're trying to look at this only from a zoning perspective, and it is impossible, really, for us to try and do that. We try and do that as best as we can. But from a resident's perspective, and I said I've been on that side, I've been in situations like this, you want to see what the development is because you want to know, are we going to have enough green space? We need to make sure that there are green spaces and parks and places for all of people to gather and for kids to play from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. If our community is going to be a real success, we're going to have children living in apartments, and we're going to have them playing with children from single-family homes, and they're going to share spaces together because that's how we're going to grow, and they're going to build networks. But it is really difficult when we can't see all of that at the front end at this time. And that's where it comes back to. I said the parkland, and I'd like to see more of that. I'd also just make a general suggestion that if council moves ahead with this, that they ensure that the development charges that are associated with parks and green space stay in the area. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but if this rezoning goes forward, and if this development goes forward, certainly there is going to need to be green space that works for everybody, people who are there now and people who will be there in the future. With respect to H to K, I don't have any further comments. The last here, those are the public comments. I'm going back, addressed many of them throughout my comments so far here tonight. But I wanted to return to a few of them, so how I sort of attribute weight, and weight is basically how much value I give one comment over another. As I said, there will be some comments that that have received that I give no value to, and there'll be some that I give high value to. So I've tried to separate them into three categories. And I have process written down here. I've already talked about that, so I'm going to skip it. With respect to higher weight, comments in regards to Greenwood Drive traffic, and I put it with high weight. With comments with respect to ingress and egress, that's the in and out of the proposed zone. I give to high weight both during construction and in the future. And I said as well earlier that from the future we have to look all the way across towards Central Street. With respect to protection of green space and the environment, now that would be environmental review is done by the province, but at the same time, I still attribute that to high weight. Protecting green spaces is really, really, really important for our community. As I said, I've been on the other side, opposing the rezoning, a much smaller situation, but the drive for me was I didn't want to see a park space and forest cut down. Particularly after forests had already been cut down in our city. The higher weight as well, there was a comment, now this is sort of attributed this on the opposite side, that R4 needs to be throughout the city. I agree. I think that's really important. The area that we're looking at here to the left, where a lot of you live, there is very little R4. This is probably the single biggest area where there is no R4 in the city. We're going to need to have more R4 in the city because we're just going to have more housing options for people that live here. But I do attribute higher weight to any concerns with respect to density, on both sides. Medium weight attributed to comments with respect to low density neighborhood. I don't want my neighborhood to be anything but R1, and I don't want to live near apartments. That's a little bit on the lower side. Medium weight strain on existing and future services. Absolutely, I think those are all valid concerns as the community grows, whether that's fire service, fire, police, sewer, water. All of those are concerns, and they are raised, and I think staff addressed a lot of them. Medium weight for the need for R1 housing as well. I saw myself quoted a couple of times. I would say out of context, but that's okay. That's the life we live. And I continue to agree. We do need R1 housing. I was happy to see the preservation of R1 housing backing onto the current homes on Greenwood Drive. But as I said earlier, the reality is our community is almost 50% single-family R1 housing. People aren't buying R1 housing anymore for the most part, or building it because it's become too expensive. People are looking at a variety of different housing options. And this property itself was rezoned in 2005 as R1 with some R2, and we haven't seen any development there. Transition and landscaping, I give medium weight to as well. I did like to see the roads as transitions from as density increased, and the landscaping again goes back to the process situation. I think a lot of people would like to be able to see what's it going to look like a little bit better than what is it theoretically going to the colors of the zones. Noise concerns, I give medium weight, and a quiet neighborhood, I also give medium weight. As I said earlier, Greenwood Drive residents attributed higher weight. I don't think most, I use Century Court or Bernard or Lexi or Rebecca, I don't think there's going to be any noise differences in those areas. Okay, I'm just telling you what I think. Then I'll tell you what, low weight, foreign developer, offshore developer, I give that low weight. Watching sunrises and stargazing, I give that low weight. Property values, I know this is, you may disagree, I give that low weight because the data and evidence, like I said earlier, suggests the exact opposite. Where there is development, property values go up. And just, if anyone wants to provide evidence or data to the contrary, I'd certainly be welcome to accept that. But particularly as well, I sort of lay on the property values in the last 5 years have increased drastically, which is great for people who own homes, like myself. We've seen a lot of equity grow in our house, but it has become a very, very real problem for half our community who does not own homes. So if we are going to succeed as a community as well, we need to make sure that we try to do our best to narrow the gap between people who have and those who have not, and as a society we continue to spread and separate, and I think that's a very big concern. The suburbs of the city comments, I give that low weight. As I said, I don't think this is the suburbs of the city. I think Miscush is the suburbs. Enhancing individual councillors' resumes, I give low weight. I also don't know what that means or what that was alluding to. And I give low weight to either or suggestions So that would be, well, instead of here, why don't you go build housing north of the hospital? Like, because that's not an option at this point. Yes, those areas need to be developed. Yes, I think this council's made really bold decisions to invest in an east-west connector to open up more housing, which would be another 125 acres to start, and ultimately 300 in some. But it isn't a this or that spot. We have to deal with what's before us. So I've kind of gone on and said, I think, everything that I need to say. I also think that, I guess the one point I also wanted to make here, I don't think I've done a very good job at explaining the need for housing in Summerside. I talked about it in the election. It was the first point on my pamphlet. I talked about it throughout the election. I talked about it after the election. I talk about it all the time. But at the same time, we haven't done always a great job reaching out and trying to connect what that actually means. So the expected growth of Summerside's between now and 2031 is going to be another 1,900 households, give or take. That basically means about 190 to 210 units per year. The city of Summerside also has a housing needs assessment study that we did, but it was using 2016 data. Even that was showing us needing around 100 units a year. To put that in context, right now I think we're building approximately 165 units are under construction in Summerside. So this year, we're going to fall further behind in terms of what our housing needs are, which means we're going to have more housing pressures. That's how tough of a situation we're in. And that's how badly we need housing in our community. If we continue to fall behind on our housing supply, household formation will become suppressed. So household formation is basically when people get together and form a household and have kids and stay in a certain place. The result of that is a declining population, both of kids and of young families. And as I said yesterday, or not yesterday, earlier, it seems like yesterday when I started, we have a huge need for young working families in this city in order to take care of our older adults and to fill a labor gap that we're just at the tip of the baby boomers leaving our workforce. So even as of right now, we're building probably 30 to 50 fewer units than we need every year. This is going to be a huge challenge. This is going to be probably the largest challenge of this council, and probably for the years ahead. If we continue to have a widening housing shortage and our completions don't keep up with our population growth, this crisis will be exacerbated, and young families will. What ends up happening is people start forming homes later, which is a delay in starting independent households due to lack of affordable housing. I always say attainable housing, and suppressed household formation will have significant economic, demographic, and political ramifications for the future of Summerside. So what we may not like today, if we don't, as a community, do more YIMBY and less NIMBY, we are going to be in a lot of trouble, and we're going to be back here going, what are we going to do about it? And we're trying to do everything we can at this stage to get housing built so that we don't end up in that situation, because some communities are going to, and they're the communities that don't work together and that don't increase their housing supply. They're going to really, really struggle. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to suffer, and it's going to be our oldest, and it's going to be our most vulnerable first. There's going to be a number of people who are going to be fine because they're going to be able to manage it because they have the financial means to do so, but there's going to be a heck of a lot of people who don't. And I don't look forward I'm not trying to get us to that spot. I'm trying to get us to the spot where we make sure everyone has a high quality of life in the future here at Summerside. So this decision isn't just about, I listen to the public comments, but this isn't just about your comments or just about your concerns. This decision in a lot of ways is about the concerns of our community today and our concerns of our community in the future. If tenants and low-income families are crowded out of rental markets, as higher income households compete with existing incumbents for scarce rental options, we will also see other things that we are starting to see in our city, and it's only going to get worse. We're going to see more and more people pushed out of the housing spectrum on the bottom end. We're going to see more and more people ending up homeless. We're going to see more and more pressures on our social services, and we're going to have all kinds of other problems that we're trying to get ahead of. So losing young people, decreasing household formation, and having more people become homeless is a real big problem for me. And the last is that Summerside would, if we do not grow, we're going to lose our appeal to newcomers due to a chronic housing shortage. And if you haven't noticed, newcomers are keeping our businesses and city open and running. We as a community are more people here in Summerside are dying than are being born. So we're not going to grow unless we have newcomers, and that's newcomers both from international but also newcomers from across Canada. And our international newcomers, 9 in 10 of them when they arrive here in Summerside are under the age of 40. And a lot of them don't show up with a whole ton of money to be able to afford a $380,000 single-family home. They need an apartment, or they need a townhouse. They need somewhere to be able to stay, to get settled, and then to be able to contribute to the economy, to get to work. And if you speak to all of the major employers here in Summerside, they will tell you the same thing. I cannot hire enough people. We don't have anywhere for them to live. We have major employers here talking about looking at building their own housing complexes somewhere, because they just don't have anywhere to be able to put the people that they need. So I'd rather see those people live here in Summerside as opposed to outside in Miscush or Slemon Park or somewhere else where the community will get benefit from that. On top of that, we as in Summerside are susceptible to out-migration. We lose more people to elsewhere in Prince Edward Island than we gain, which again exacerbates the need to make sure that we're building a community that works for young working families and for newcomers. So as I said, to maintain affordability, Summerside needs to aim to build around 200 net units a year so that household formation rates continue as to where they are. But to improve affordability, the city should set an annual target, in my opinion, that also focuses on historically suppressed cohorts. This will make the city more affordable and attractive to younger residents, especially those looking to start a family in a community that is receptive to their shelter needs. Maybe, I don't know if she doesn't agree with me or she dropped something down the stairs. I'm not quite sure. And the stairs are open, so it can be pretty loud. I've dropped many things down the stairs and been warned that I should not be walking down the stairs on my phone. That's probably true. I think we would have heard a scream. But assumptions, yeah, that's true. So I'm struggling with this quite a bit. I think that there are issues outside the scope of the zoning review that we can't detach from the application because I simply don't think it's realistic. I think if this parcel of land is not developed in a way that is not developed, we as a community, whether you agree with me or not, you as well are going to suffer. The people that you care about are going to suffer. And you're not going to see it right away, but it's going to be a continued suffering that we're going to struggle with. We will just not have the people that we need, and people will be ending up in situations we don't want them to be ending up in. So as I said at the beginning, everyone has a role to play. We obviously are in a difficult situation of trying to figure out how to make a decision on this, and that is sort of the summation of my comments. No problem. I'm happy to provide. You're welcome to come to council anytime and listen to me talk. We usually have a smaller crowd, but I think it's really important to be able to share with you the process that we go through and think about, and that I know these are decisions that affect people. They affect all sorts of people, and I think those decisions deserve attention. I think those decisions and residents deserve an explanation, and whether it's in a lecture format or not, I would rather be able to sit down and speak in an open forum where people could ask questions and we could have a dialogue. I think that would be more valuable. But the alternative and the process that is used in the past was to sit here and say that the mayor doesn't have a vote, and I've got nothing to say, and I think people decided that wasn't what they wanted anymore, so I will say what I think. And like I said, we may not always agree, but I will share with you why I got to a decision that I got to. and let the chips fall sort of where they may. I'm not here to hide behind process or council or anything like that, or leave only the tough decisions to them. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you. I have consumed a lot of water, so, oh, please.
Just, we did get this package, and I already mentioned one thing, but as I went through everything in it, like all the names, and there's two things at the back, and one is not signed by anybody. It has, here are some ways which a municipality can indirectly influence population growth and potentially avoid overpopulation. And then there's another one that says the potential socio-economic impacts of rising cost of living on Prince Edward Island. And it just says author, Prince Edward Island, June 25th. So I just wonder if there's anybody has a signature to that, or whoever. And to be honest, when I read through it, there's some things where I think speak against, and then there's some that it sounds like it's speaking in favor of new development. So I'm just a little bit, if anybody signed it, or if there's just so we know. It's the last two for councillors that have anything.
Wendy Plant, 25 Campbell Street. We've been submitted quite a few things, and that was submitted anonymously, so we decided to attach it because we were unable to speak this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if that is all from around the desks tonight, we will move on to the vote, and I will just reiterate again that this is planning board only, and whether or not it is carried or whether or not it's defeated, it still goes to council for the final decision. So there are two. I will read them both, and yeah. Well, the public, the open floor component was the last meeting. Well, there was many people that weren't here last week that emailed, and we read those on the record in the minutes, and it's just a process. And the reason for that, and I want to give the reason for that, is because when the agenda goes out, I'll give an example. The last public meeting, there was an agenda item, and it was part of the process, and it was the open floor for questions and comments. And this particular portion of the application process, since that is not part of the process, it's not in the agenda, it's not there. So for transparency, if there's people out in the community that, you know, they're reading the agenda as it comes out, and that's not part of it. So I don't know if that made any sense. It probably didn't, but.
Just, Councillor, I think also to note that this is a decision, this is a recommendation of planning board, not of council, and there's still period between now and when council meets that you can continue to contact any councillor or myself or any, I don't vote at the next stage, but anybody. So if you have comments or concerns, you can continue to share those, obviously, right up until council vote. You can send them after, but not going to be helpful.
On this one, though, could you just answer one question? And this is one of the bigger ones. Affordability is mentioned, housing costs, or, you know, the housing crisis, the healthcare crisis, those are key topics in any city or town in Canada right now. What is Flourish Development's definition of affordable? Good question. So, well, I certainly can't answer it as a counselor, but I will just repeat what the question was because it wasn't on microphone and there's people listening at home. The question was, what is the developer's definition of affordable housing? So that will be a question perhaps that we can forward to the developer, and we can respond to that question at the July 4th meeting. So I'm certainly not in a place to answer it right now because I don't know the answer to that. So. Will there be a representative from the developer at the July 4th meeting? That's up to them. I believe they're here now, but we don't mandate that there's anyone in attendance at any meeting. So.
You know, like affordable housing is such a challenging one. There are two definitions that are used that are applicable here in Prince Edward Island. None are with respect to anything that's before us today, but just for informational purposes. The province of Prince Edward Island identifies affordable housing when they are providing subsidies for people to be 25 to 30% of their take-home income. CMHC, which is the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, sets an affordable housing number at a much higher percentage based on what the median income is in a community. So if you ask different people what affordable housing means, it's going to mean something different to everybody. Just for clarity's sake on that, but
in Flourish's business plan, once this is completed, right? You shouldn't be able to skirt it. It should be in the business plan, and if it's not, I'm certainly not going to contest it.
Well, if I can attempt to answer that, this whole application process is just for the land use. It's not for the physical development, or that would be part of their, in future.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, and we'll probably could get into a back and forth all night here, regardless if it's affordable or not affordable housing, it's whether or not this zone fits that area. That's what we as council are deciding. It has nothing to do, because we don't have a development agreement in front of us, so it's what does that zone fit this area? So that's the decision.
But affordable housing has been used as a reference in many of the points in this report. So when you're using that, you have to.
I hear what you're saying, but as a counselor, I personally am not taking that into account for my decision. It's whether or not that zone fits in that area, whether or not those R1, R2, R4 housing fit in that area the way it is right now. Because the plans can change, right? And that's what I referenced earlier. There was an R4 that was supposed to be townhouses. It was R4, it went to apartment buildings. So it's whether or not that zone fits for that area. That's what, as counselors, what we're deciding. If that, okay.
Fair enough, thank you.
Councillor McColman, your light is visible.
At the first meeting, council, we were to listen, to observe, listen to what the residents had to say. This evening is meeting 2, but in between, I've had questions from some residents, and I feel like I have to bring that question up in order to get an answer from the developers, so that's what I'm doing. In the first presentation, the developers had indicated that there were 30 different companies, PNP companies, and what some residents were wondering is, I know that there's developments in Charlottetown, Stratford, and I believe in Montague, but the question that was put to me, and I couldn't answer it, is, of those 30 different companies, is that people that live here? Is it off-island ownership because it's an international ownership? And I guess the second, or part B to that question, was people wanted to know, is that going to help our local tradespeople and contractors for the building and the development? I could not fully answer that, but I said that I would ask it tonight if given that permission. So I'm just wondering if we could get some kind of an answer on that for our residents that have those questions. Thank you.
Okay. I will refer to either Aaron or Linda if that's something that can be answered tonight, or if that's something that we can look into and possibly answer for July 4th.
Again, I would refer to what Deputy Mayor is saying. The issue before us is the land use. That's what's before us, whether it's bought, sold by 4 other people after this, or 10 other people, or kept. We're to consider the land use, and that's why we don't get hung up as much on concepts of what's going to go there, because it could change. So we look at the land use, R1, R2 to R4, and that's what we've been consistently trying to get people to focus on, and that and not get totally caught up in the development, because markets could change, ownership could change, and they do something different. So we're strictly consistently trying to say, yes, it's great to have a concept, to have an idea what it looks like, but we're strictly looking at the land use. All we consider as far as the ownership of who put in the application, if they're the current owner of the land, that's our control as far as the ownership, whether that's 2 people or 20 people. This is not really of reference to us staff.
I think that's the point we try our best to drive home for every single one of these, is that it has nothing to do with who or necessarily what is going there, just what the land is proposed to be used for.
But up until tonight, we were not aware of if it was going to be looked at for 4 different zones. I think this question was fermented in people's minds because they had them. The part B to the question then, since I can't get that answer, is I think, you know, we have heard the comments, affordable housing, attainable housing, the market-driven prices, that sort of thing. And I believe that, you know, from some of those questions, people are wondering if there's that many companies, 30, they're going to be looking for a return on their investment. And so there is a question behind people's minds about the cost of how much those rents are going to be or how that will work out in a lease agreement. So, and I don't know.
Yeah, and that's certainly nothing that I can answer as a planning board member or as a counselor, because it's details that are deeper than what I'm obligated to look at, so. Anyone else?
So a question for staff. Are there mechanisms at the development agreement stage to restrict areas that are zoned R4 to townhouses? At the development area, that is an as-of-right apartment building, R4 is an R4, there are no other mechanisms available.
Correct. When the land is zoned R4, they can do any one of the as-of-right uses. There'll be some there that require discretionary use that would come before us, but same as the R1, R2. It could be R2 and they could still find a market and have them sell as single-family homes if they can find a market of people to buy to build them as R1s. Same thing in the R4. We have land in Summerside that was zoned R4 and the developers chose to develop it as semi-detached. They can do the maximum, but there's other listed, the lower levels or lower densities are as of right as well. So that's why it could change based on what the current market is or interest or number of developers or builders that want to do spec homes at the time or whatever, you know. So that's why we stick on the land use. I know everyone should consider the highest case scenario, which we've done with our traffic numbers as well, the same as the flows of everything. Say, if it's R4, go the highest density case. But it may be, as of right, they could do something less as well.
So, at this point, again, nothing is going to be decided tonight. This is simply planning board endorsing or not endorsing to council.
And the density of units is still based on percentage of the lot used. It's not number of units. You guys have mechanisms in place already that allows a lot to be developed, the total square footage of a building up to a certain percentage of the lot. That's already in your guidelines to say. Now, whether they're 700 square foot units or 1,200 square foot units, that's for the developer to figure out the need, you know. But the maximum number of size of a building is based on the size of the lot. That's in your parameters already when they get to the development stage.
Yep. Okay, so, go ahead.
I guess, and I think I know where Mayor Kuchar was going with this question, where there's, when I think of the development and how they buddied the R1 to R1 and then R2, and then talk of R3, which is really R4 because we don't have the R3 ability, row housing. There's a gap there internally with us. I wonder if we're just putting things ahead of itself without having the other thing solved. There is a major need for housing in this city, and I think everybody in here, whether or not you agree with this development or not, realize that, and we have to do something. I would hate to see this development die on the floor because of something we as council have no ability to rectify currently. Exactly, and I don't know if you want us to vote on what they submitted, so.
Well, they said they were gonna work with us, but they didn't change anything.
So I guess my point is, the way it currently sits in front of council, there's a bit of a issue there with our zoning as a city, and we need to recognize that, but there's also issues. So I'm just, yeah, I'm saying that more as a comment, and I'm sitting there thinking.
Aaron, would you be able to explain the CDAs and if a CDA was explored for this parcel?
CDAs, they're coming in with something that probably doesn't fit within our current guidelines. But if you look at R1, R2, and R4, they do fit within our current guidelines. And they're not proposing anything that couldn't fit other than this R3 or the row housing, but the row housing does fit under restricted use with a 1-year application. So everything that's being proposed would fit into an existing slot. When you're looking at something for a CDA, you're saying, okay, it doesn't quite fit, so you're asking a developer to come in with an individual package and with something, I'll say, unique that doesn't fit within your guidelines for a major area and consider it in the overall package, and then form a development agreement for that as of right then for what that would be listed in that comprehensive development area, not just one lot, you know? So putting in a comprehensive development area for R1 and the R2, we already have zones that allow that. Putting in the R4, we already have zones that allow that, so it's not really getting you a need for, fit the need for a comprehensive development area. It's the one spot where we have the 1-year limit on the restricted use approval, and to allow a large quantity of them, it's not realistic to say that that would be valid for 1 year when they wouldn't be able to get it built. That's the only part that's the, I'll say, outside of our current set of parameters.
And just to confirm, the restricted, like a restricted use application. Sorry, yeah. would be for
Discretionary
a
use, sorry.
Discretionary, yeah. it would- A discretionary use application, if that were zoned, they would have to build within 1 year in that area?
The approval is valid for 1 year.
The approval, so, and then if the year expired and the development had not, I don't know if it's completed or started, I'm assuming it's started as opposed to substantial completion for a year?
Just started, I guess, yeah, started. but
And then what would happen if that development had not begun? Would it revert to the
revert
previous
back.
zoning?
Correct. That's my understanding, yeah.
Just gonna say one thing. And that's the fact that you got one road. Now, Mr. Kuchar, Mayor Kuchar, you said, I live on Rebecca, and the reason I'm saying this, you say, well, I don't see how it affects someone like Gavin or this work.
Do you want to go to the mic, just so everybody, there's people in the other room? and-
Sorry, no, Counselor, I think,
Or we'll
look,
just-
guys, I think, no, we're not gonna, no. Excuse me, I'm gonna interrupt you because we do have to follow a process here. Everybody had the opportunity to provide comments. Everyone had the opportunity to provide written comments and verbal comments. If we continue to allow some individuals to say certain things, that isn't fair to everybody else, and it's not fair, we don't have a forum here. This isn't the process to have a discussion back and forth. We've gotten. Absolutely, and this, at this.
All I wanna comment is on one thing. If you don't want me to, that's fine, I'll leave.
I'm just trying to make sure that we follow the proper process at this point in time. And that this is the opportunity where we have to make comments and respond, and as I said earlier, it's tough with the process that we have set up. Councillor McDougall? Go ahead.
Aaron, I know the need for housing. I'm on committees and I'm on the housing and been with the Federation and everything. I know the need that's out there for housing. I also hear the concerns that are in the room. The question I have is when we're sitting here and then the recommendation comes back that high density is not allowed in that area, I forget the wording. Why, if it's not allowed in that area, I'm wondering why the developer wasn't told at first that it's not allowed. I'm just trying to figure out the process. If that's, I guess if it was looked at first and we said, you can't do that in this area, there might have been something that came in that was acceptable, but I find that we spent a lot of time on the high density, like 17, 24 units, and maybe I'm hearing things wrong, but that's what it seems like to me. I just thought that the developer should have been told prior to the rezoning. Just,
They've never submitted anything since. They've had time to make the change that they work on, they have not submitted, or you can't tell us they've submitted. Sorry,
okay.
not supposed to comment.
Councilor Doing, I guess, we don't direct an applicant when they come in, they want to rezone something. Again, we'll tell them, here's what the current rules are. They can bring something for consideration. And as you know, in the past number of years, there's various opinions, and even in this report, pro and con to certain things. We're here to provide you guys the input. And council in previous years have gone forward with staff's recommendation, and councils have gone forward against staff's recommendation. So we're still bringing forward the pros and cons to everything so that the planning board can make an informed decision. The council members that are here can hear the pros and cons and make their decision at the time. So again, the comments were even back from staff at the end saying, they weren't saying no to all the R4. They were saying, okay, here's some pockets where they could allow some of the R4 was one of the recommendations when I read through the various staff people's reports. Wasn't no to no R4 in this property. It was in pockets abutting the green spaces. These areas is, when you get into the details, they are gonna require lift stations on this property. There are criteria that we're gonna, whenever they lay it out, that's gonna be harder to surface, or more expensive to service, which fits some of the criteria to fit R4 more density to make the project work. You know, as far as a street with no lift station, it's going to be $400,000 to $500,000 per lift station if they have to put it in. You know, so those were some of the criteria that were listed there, harder to service. So again, we have stage zoning of R1, 2, another row housing in R4, which fits a lot of the common staging or transition of zones from one development, one section to another. There are, as you mentioned, I think the mayor highlighted a lot of the clauses. I'm not going to go back into them. So there was a lot of pros and cons as far as what could fit there and whether the full amount of R4 is there or a portion of the R4 is there. The rest of it seems to fit, and we highlighted the shortfall of, I mean, if they chose to, and we want to go through and do a phase of the R1 or this new zone of, if they come in and ask for it as a discretionary use. If they ask for discretionary use, and they can have the manpower or forces or commitments from crews to go in and build that interior part first, it's going to be expensive to do, but we're saying that may be an avenue that if they went ahead, that they would take that risk and do those ones within a short period of time. So again, we don't limit a developer from walking in and say, don't even bother bringing that in for consideration, that ain't going to pass, because that's not our process, is to hear their opinions, get opinions presented, and bring it forward for planning board and council to vote on. So even if we were totally against something, we'd still be going through this process for them to actually bring forward their recommendation.
Okay, yeah, and I guess I don't see it there, but I thought it was that you're not recommending it because it was going against something, high density regulations or whatever.
And I think what they're saying is, right now, they are saying that center pocket to make it R4 now, where you don't have a development agreement to lock it down to say, yes, that would just be row housing or those 4-unit
Right.
buildings, that the staff's recommendation was not to recommend that, so that you can, and actually create a new zone to allow a specific use of that they can come forward and start the process over for that pocket of land or whatever portions you approve or don't approve if you don't approve it.
So is this something that we could table until we look at the process? Is this something we could, I'm just trying to, again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. Development is needed in this city. I don't totally oppose the plan. I do understand the R3 requirement that we would like to see as part of the development maybe for that transition. But I struggle with the R4 with not having some way to control that. That being said, I'm wondering what the option is, Aaron, and maybe it's a it's a vote here tonight. If there's anything that we can, if there's anything we can talk about heading to our council meeting for the final vote, is there anything gonna happen in between, or we're pretty much
I
where
think
we're
we've
at?
brought forward and gone through 2 steps with this concept. Follow this current proposal through, vote on it. What is approve, what is don't. The applicant's available to come back with a revision. It has to be a major revision, and announce. So your point, you're through a process.
Yep.
Follow your process, and if a portion or all of it's turned down, they have the option then to come back with a revised concept that's a major change within one or whenever they're ready to. But in the meantime, we wouldn't want to pause this to allow a special zone to happen in the middle, because this is not just for this pocket of land. If we create a new zone for row housing, it's citywide. So it's important that you do that as a separate process so that it's not seen as doing something specific for a development, whether it's this one or somewhere else. Because the same rules would apply citywide then.
So there's 2 planning board recommendations, R1, R2, and then the R4. R4 would potentially come back, is it?
The PERD or what was in?
Sometimes I ask questions that I
Yeah.
know the answer,
Yeah,
I just want
what's in our
others to hear.
recommendation, I'm not saying, I think it was identified that the back portion or the eastern portion come back as a, I think staff identified as a PERD, I forget what the acronyms for, but basically allowing, and a smaller portion of the R4 than what was presented.
Okay.
Now, whether that was ours, that doesn't match exactly that was our overall thought. The recommendations were there on the first portion and the second portion.
Okay, thank you.
So, please. 2 recommendations, well, obviously, planning board will vote on them separately. I think we're about set to do that, so keep in mind, this is just planning board, and council will make their decision July 4th. So, planning board recommendation, first one. The application received from Z&C Flourish International Limited for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to low-density residential R2 zone be recommended to be approved by council. So we need a member from planning board that would like to move that. Deputy Mayor Snow. Second. Councillor Morrison. I can only assume there's no more questions. We'll call for the vote from planning board. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Carried 3-1. Planning board recommendation. The application received from Z&C Flourish International Limited for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, and from low-density residential R2 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, as shown on the applicant's plan, not be recommended to be approved by council. So, I definitely need clarification if that's a typo or
Yeah,
if we're
I think
voting yay to not recommend.
I think it should be a positive recommendation that you guys can defeat, and yeah. then
Same as
even
before.
Even if it is
I-
a positive recommendation, the entire council then can choose to support or defeat.
So I will attempt to reread that correctly and we'll. Yeah, so as the recommendation that we just did, a yay vote from planning board will endorse this section of the application. It's just worded incorrectly, and I'm going to reread it now correctly.
Just eliminate the word "not" there. Then.
Exactly, yeah, but I am going to reread it into the minutes, so. Planning board recommendation, the application received from Z&C Flourish International Limited for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, and from low-density residential R2 zone to high-density residential R4 zone, as shown on the applicant's plan, be recommended to be approved by council. Planning board members is there a mover? If not, then it will just go to council without endorsement, so.
This planning board needs to make a recommendation to your council, whether that, and then you can choose to, at council, to further.
So we could have,
You still gotta move it.
yeah, we'll
I'll-
still,
I'll
we still need to move it,
Yep.
okay? Councillor, Deputy Mayor Snow, seconder, Councillor Morrison. Planning board members in favor, say,
Well, I just want to clarify, so there's, right here, R4, we go, at that point, it can be strictly R4, there's no need for them to follow what is proposed, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry,
and this
can I-
is not the decision.
Can
This
I ask
is
one quick question
moving
there
it to
too,
council.
Councillor Drawn? Is there a reason why this one is separated out? Why this one includes 2 rezonings and the first one is just the one? The first one's R1 to R2 and then this one is R1 to R4 and R2 to R4? The reason why those are together and there's not 3 recommendations here?
If we go back to the map, I hate to say it, yeah. The existing zoning underneath, there is some of it that's R2 that would go to R4, and there is some of it that's R1 that would go to R4. Whereas the far left-hand side just went from R1 to R2. Hold on.
Okay. Should I read it again? I will, just in case anything ever happened, so. Planning Board recommendation, the application received from Z&C Flourish International Limited for portions of PID number 1163526 to amend the city zoning bylaw from single-family residential R1 zone to high-density residential R4 zone and from low-density residential R2 zone to high-density residential R4 zone as shown on the applicant's plan be recommended to be approved by council. Moved by Deputy Mayor Snow, seconded by Councillor Morrison. All Planning Board members in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. The endorsement is defeated. So,
Okay,
both of
Councillor Duran,
those,
can I-
yes.
Can I make a quick statement, though?
Oh, why not?
Because although I like the applause, I do want to make it very clear that I think there is a fit in that area for some R4 zoning. There's currently R4 zoning in that area. It's to make it, stage it and make sure it's correct, and I don't know if we could do that under the current. That's why I couldn't support it during there, but I just want to make that statement very clear because I don't want anybody to think I just am totally against the apartments in that area if something was to ever come back this way, so.
Noted. Okay. And again, to be 100% entirely clear, both of those recommendations will come back in the form of resolutions at our special council meeting, July 4th. The final decision will be made for both of them separately. So, at 6 p.m. Okay. So, I guess that being said, if the left side of the room could take McDougal Drive home and the right side take Greenwood Drive home, that'd help. Too soon.
Councillor, we'll just take a 5-minute recess.
5-minute recess, sure.
Nobody's left, right? Nobody's here. Carrie's in the kitchen. All right, Carrie's in the kitchen. It's like a song. Bruce, you write a song. Carrie's in the kitchen. It's a new. It's a new one. Dinah's been replaced. Oh, she's back. All right, where's my agenda? So we will continue our council meeting. Brian, are you good? Okay, so we'll continue the planning board meeting of June 25th, 2023. It may be helpful to close the door and maybe just remove the sign, JP, that says that we're in an in-camera session. Oh, I thought you were getting up to do the door. I'll have a Joe Louie.
I'll have the other half of my club sandwich.
Yeah. And Councillor Duran, back to you with respect to item number
All right.
5, please.
Not done yet. All right, this one is a little more exciting, maybe. Subject, 281 Water Street, a development review for downtown district number 1. Supporting explanation, purpose, under section 22.10 of the zoning bylaw, all developments in the downtown zone shall be reviewed in accordance with the guidelines and standards in section 22 of the zoning bylaw. The proposed development is within district number 1, historic Water Street, downtown core, and is subject to review by staff, Heritage Board, Planning Board, and Council. Background, the city released an RFP to invite interested parties to submit proposals for a mixed-use building with commercial units at street level and residential units above for a city-owned site at 281 Water Street, also known as Core Block. As a result, a preliminary design has been submitted for review. The property is currently owned by the city of Summerside. The city has designated Aaron Stavert, architect representing the developer, to achieve approval of the proposed development design. And there is a layout of the proposed site and the proposed design concepts from every which direction. Report, the downtown design guidelines and standards described in section 22.2 of the zoning bylaw must be considered when reviewing a proposed development design. The following must be reviewed: streetscape, public realm, street vitality, creating active building frontage, parking and access, height and massing, view corridors to the waterfront, not applicable as this proposed development is not in a designated view corridor, and exterior cladding. The attached explanation outlining the proposed development/design compliance with the downtown design guidelines in the downtown District 1 historic Water Street. Heritage review. At this time, the city does not have an active heritage board, therefore no review was completed and no recommendation could be made on this development. Is that something that's going to be done, or the fact that we don't have one sort of eliminates that from needing to be done?
We were just processing an application when it was received based on what we had in place at the time. If we were reviewing and a bylaw was under review, we would be proceeding with what we have at the time. So that's what we went forward with direction from senior staff to say, this is the application that came in, proceed with the application based on what we have in place today to allow the development to proceed or not be held up.
Okay, so is there a likelihood that any people in the city or elsewhere that have an interest in heritage, et cetera, might
There may well be, I don't know, but I would comment that the comment that you had there before where not having their recommendation forward, we asked for the applicant and the architect to provide an opinion of how they complied with the guidelines that were there. So it'd probably be good in the absence of not having that heritage board that we probably read that into the record. I think it's a page or so, just to see that you guys get an understanding from their opinion of how it's meeting the heritage.
Okay.
With the input from the heritage board, at least you'd be hearing from
Okay.
their architect, who has some heritage background. I'm not going to get into his qualifications, but
Okay.
he can do that himself. But we asked for a report from them to outline where, here's the guidelines, tell us how you met or exceeded or didn't, and
Okay.
why if you didn't.
So in the absence of a heritage committee, we're still sort of comparing some of the features and criteria with what they would have had to use anyway, so.
Correct.
Okay. Building form and land use review. Building form. 1, building materials, keeping with heritage character of Water Street, true to form. The finish appears to be brick, as are other buildings along Water Street. The floor elevations and door and window locations appear to be in line with the building at 275 Water Street, downtown convenience, and appears to meet standards. 2, blank walls at street level, maximum of 5 meters, appears to meet standards. 3, first floor height, the commercial uses 4.5 meters, and that appears to meet standards. 4, building height minimum meets standards. 5, building height maximum exceeds allowable 4 stories, may exceed building height subject to section 22.7, part 7, which states special height requirements may apply in District 1, Historic Water Street Downtown Core, for buildings higher than 4 stories in the following cases. A transitional height plan, buildings 4 stories or higher in height should step back at the 5th story by a 45-degree transitional height plane as shown on the drawing. And bonus heights, a bonus height may be permitted in exchange for providing specific public benefits. A public benefit may be provided in another downtown zone district from the development. Developments that propose a demolition of a designated and or non-designated heritage resource will not be eligible for a bonus height. All bonus height proposals shall be reviewed by Heritage Planning Board and approved by Council. Proposals for height bonus may be permitted if the developer provides one or more of the following public benefits. Number 1, adaptive reuse, maintenance, preservation, or enhancement of a heritage resource, whether designated or non-designated. 2, the provision of public art, urban green space, plaza, boardwalk, or other facility where a deficiency exists or as indicated by the city. This may be provided in other districts. And number 3, substantial facade improvements along Water Street that significantly enhance the vitality of the Heritage District. 6, street wall height, 4 stories. This building exceeds 4 stories. Land use / zoning. 1, street level and land use. The apartments are permitted use on floors above street level. The commercial is permitted providing it's listed in the permitted uses of District Number 1. 2, building placement. 0 lot line allowed. 3, parking, not allowed between the building and the street, and that meets the standards. 4, lot frontage, 15 meters minimum, and that meets the standards. And 5, density bonus. Bonus may be allowed subject to transitional height. Stories higher than 4 must step back by 45 degrees, and a public benefit be provided. Staff review. City staff have reviewed the supporting explanation and concept plan submitted. The land use matters regarding the proposed development / design meets the downtown design guidelines for the downtown District 1 zone, with the exception of building height. The allowable maximum height is 4 stories with a transitional step back at the 5th story. The proposed design does not step back at the 5th story, and the developer does not provide the public benefit being provided. Staff cannot make a recommendation of this building height and bonus density as staff were to consider a recommendation from the Heritage Board. As per section 22.10, part B3 of the zoning bylaw, the planning board shall make a recommendation to council on this development before it is approved or denied. The planning board recommendation, whether carried or defeated, will be brought forward to council for a final decision. Planning board recommendation, the proposed development / design received from Aaron Stavert for 281 Water Street be recommended to be approved by council, moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Snow. Aaron.
Before you vote or take questions, maybe if you could,
Oh, just go through the attachment?
yeah, just so
Sure.
there may be questions that get answered there, or maybe something that comes up there.
Okay, so this is I guess like a memo or a letter from Open Practice, Collaborative Architecture. I assume this is from Aaron Stavert, okay, to Technical Services, Planning Department, regarding proposed preliminary design for the core block property, PID 309674. How does the proposed design meet the downtown D zone heritage and design guidelines? As outlined in the core block RFP dated March 2021, the proposed development is a mixed-use building with approximately 12,000 square feet of commercial units on the street level, along with access to underground parking and a lobby area for the 40 residential units above. The property fronts on 3 streets. The primary facades of the building face Water Street and Summer Street, and the building is terminated by First Street on the north end. The design seeks to reinforce those character-defining elements found within Summerside's historic downtown, by carefully building upon existing traditions of scale, form, and texture. The building aims to contribute to a strong sense of place while fostering vitality and public engagement. Parking and access. Although the bylaws only require 0.5 spaces per residential unit and none for commercial space, the design aims to provide underground parking for 32 cars. A discrete entrance to the building's underground parking is located at the northwest corner of the building's main level. The ramp will be contained within the footprint of the building. In our initial review of site conditions, we've noted a high ground water level. To mitigate the risk of flooding the parking garage, the design aims to minimize the overall depth of the foundation. In efforts not to have the first floor too high above the street, we've done 2 things in the design. 1, we've sloped the floor of the parking garage, and 2, we've stepped the first floor elevation. The first floor finished elevation aims to be no higher than 2 feet above the sidewalk in all instances to maintain a connection to the street and to facilitate entry. Streetscape and street vitality. Large sections of windows along the building's street level create a continuous band of transparency, promoting interaction between the building and its flanking streets and sidewalks. Covered areas in the form of colonnades. There's a word I never saw before in my life. Colonnades provide the public with shelter from the elements, enhancing the pedestrian experience. Pronounced entrances to the residential and commercial spaces at the street level provide focal points and areas of interest along the building's exterior. The proposed design addresses the primary corner of Water and Summer with a recessed entry providing cover and allowing critical sight lines at the busy corner. To maintain accessible entries along the entire length of the building, we have stepped the first floor elevation, responding to the almost 5-foot change in grade over the length of the site. In efforts to maintain pedestrian linkages, we have pulled the building back from the HMS building and are working to develop an activated alley connecting from Water Street through to the city parking lot on First Street. Human scale. Above the street level, large, carefully placed windows create symmetry and reinforce a human scale. Inset balconies further soften the building's form and break down the overall massing while providing residents with the natural daylighting and breathtaking vistas of the Summerside waterfront and boardwalk. The structural grid is expressed as a series of columns on the ground floor and pilasters on the upper floors, subdividing the building into a smaller module. To further provide scale and texture, the facades are not flat. A primary frame, both horizontal and vertical, are proud of the building's primary surface to provide shadow and depth. Balconies are strategically inserted and differ in material to offset the heaviness of the masonry and reinforce the breakdown of the scale. Height and massing. The property straddles 2 districts as defined in the downtown design guidelines. The Water Street end falls in District Number 1, while the majority of the land falls in District Number 4. District Number 1 is permitted to be up to 10 stories with allowable density bonuses and specifies a street wall height of 4 stories before step back of the facade. District Number 4 allows up to 10 stories with no street wall height restrictions and requires a step back only when abutting a residential zone, which does not apply in this location. The proposed design is a 5-story structure with no step back at the 5th floor on the facade facing Water Street as recommended in the design guidelines. Located at the corner of Water and Summer Street, allows the building to be seen from a greater distance and allows a pedestrian to see both facades at the same time. With a wide view plane from the corner, the overall form of the building is much more important than a building contained within the middle of a block, where a pedestrian may perceive the end of the building facing the street, may only perceive the end of the building facing the street. During the design development, we found stepping the facade back only on Water Street resulted in an unbalanced design that did not address the street wall height, as the longest facade along Summer Street is not required to be stepped back. Therefore, we are recommending that given the size of the property and its corner location, a 5-story building responds better to the surroundings. Any taller and the building would look out of place. Rather than a singular step back to the 5th level along Water Street as the guidelines propose, we felt it important to afford each residential unit on the 5th level with an equal distribution of step back in the form of inset large balconies along Water Street, Summer Street, First Street, and even the interior lot line. In doing so, the form and symmetry of the building is drastically improved. Residents receive more natural light, and the public enjoys a better balance of sun and shade as the sun moves around the building. Exterior cladding, red brick, which adorns many of Summerside's most iconic buildings, the Holman Center, Summerside City Hall, Journal Pioneer, Scotiabank Building. Red brick strengthens the proposed building's connection to its surroundings and contributes to the fabric of the historic downtown. Like neighboring buildings, the proposed development uses horizontal and vertical concrete and brick accents to articulate and organize its exterior. In summary, the proposed development aims to provide the framework to support revitalization of Summerside's downtown core. 40 residential units to provide 365 days of activity and needs in the form of restaurants and services, ample parking both on-site and within the immediate vicinity, approximately 12,000 square feet of commercial space with at-grade access and ample windows to animate the street level. As design professionals, we work hard to propose buildings that find the appropriate balance, contemporary buildings of their time, but sympathetic to the urban fabric in which they are contained. We believe the proposed design responds to the design guidelines and meets the intent of the Downtown Core Master Plan. We look forward to your review and welcome an opportunity to answer any questions you may have or more information you require. Please feel free to contact me as required. And that was from Aaron Stavert. So that being said, are there any questions I know Aaron's here, and are there any questions that planning board or council may have that may not be addressed in that very detailed letter? And if not, we will just carry on with the planning board vote to endorse the recommendation. So again, I guess I'll read it one more time. If I can find it. Okay, planning board recommendation. The proposed development / design received from Aaron Stavert for 281 Water Street be recommended to be approved by council, moved by myself and seconded by Deputy Mayor Snow. All planning board members in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? There are none. Planning board recommends the development design. July 4th will be the council meeting that we will handle this next.
Building looks good, I really like it.
Fantastic.
Nice, guys.
Wonderful. And I'll hand it back over to your worship.
Great, thanks everyone, thanks for joining us, folks, and we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you, councilors. Have yourself a lovely rest of your week.